So I'm going to jump into a draw IO example just quickly, and I'm going to create a new diagram, and it's going to be, I'll just use a blank diagram, and this is going to be Unreal example. And ideally, you're going to basically throw down like boxes for different things. And you can resize the boxes you see. I didn't want to. But I could, again, bring arrows in like this. And this is be like parent, child A. And you do this on and on for the assignment. Um, Again, if you find an image that works well from Unreal documentation, go ahead and use it. So, just gonna let's jump back to here. Um, let's go through the gameplay framework. And essentially, the gameplay framework in Unreal, it's again, this is part of what we call it the Unreal way of doing things, but it does make sense when you look at it. Um, a lot of other people. A lot of things you can take away from how this is structured and used in other engines. Um, and I want to. There is what's called C++ classes, and there are blueprint classes. And these core classes exist in both sides. So that's not, and that's something with again they'll see a lot of references to UE4. UE5 hasn't changed in any dramatically in any way from what we're talking about here. In fact, so there's just several classes. There are two big classes that they highlight here: game mode class and game instance class. So game instance is basically anything is going to hold anything that is persistent through your application. So if we're building like a Skyrim style of game, your character stats, your spells, your inventory are all in your game going to be held in your game instance class. Game mode basically is the think of as the command and rules section of the application. And then we've got all these other classes. We'll go through these in a moment. Again, they just went through. Again, what they suggest is a good place to place a script response system for a first-person shooter or a timer for a race game. One thing about game modes, and this is like the big one in Unreal, is that you can assign game mode to a project or to each individual level in a project. So often projects have 2 or 3 game modes. If you're Unreal, then you've got 15. I mean, this is really where game modes come from, is Unreal Tournament. So like Deathmatch was its own game mode, Team Deathmatch, Capture the Flag, um, Assault, and so on, all had game modes. Game modes can't be changed once level, and that makes sense. It can't be changed once it's loaded. Um, that's the game mode is supposed to be there for that. Um, I've been playing. I just recently played Mass Effect 2. I finished Mass Effect 2, and I'm in Mass Effect 3. But back in Mass Effect 2, there were levels that you loaded into, and you had control of a hover type vehicle. And that's an example of a level which had its own game mode and different aspects that it was controlling. Um, Different from a level that you came in and you ran around shooting things, for example. So say the Normandy had its own game mode, um, because you couldn't. Again, you weren't shooting. You weren't running around shooting things. So yeah, that would I wouldn't it wouldn't surprise me that Normandy had its own game mode control things. Uh, so the first thing that they are highlighting here is called the pawn class, and so in Unreal we have a controller pawn type system. So the controller is a representative of either an AI or a player. So we have a player controller class. The player controller takes control of a pawn. So um, typically, there is a class here that they're not talking about. It's actor, and this is the generic. Anything in your scene is going to be an actor, whether it's a static mesh, it's a particle system, um, if it's a trigger volume, they're all actors essentially. Pawn is one of the first inheritance off of actor that's important to note because it's what the player controls. It's player model essentially. It doesn't just determine what the player or the AI entity looks visually, but also it interacts with the world in terms of collision and other physical interactions, and it could be scripted as well. So if we look at like Team Fortress 2, each of the classes would be a pawn class in Unreal Engine. They're pointing out here a character is a special type of pawn class, is pre-built movement input system, so anything humanoid. The pawn represents the physical location, rotation, so on of a player or an entity within the game. And then under default class that you can assign in your game mode, it's going to be something that inherits off the pawn class directly, the character class, which again inherits off the pawn class, or vehicle class, which inherits off of pawn class. And then again, vehicle is another class that is in the engine that is specialized. Again, it's a specialized class for vehicles. HUD class, basically anything 2D related, you're going to be coming off the HUD class. So these are later on you'll build widgets, and they are a specialized version of the HUD class essentially. Oh no, your widgets are built are played in the HUD. So basically, the HUD contains. I'm sorry, the widgets I just talked about are pieces of your interface. Your HUD is where those widgets essentially are applied to and shown on screen. Again, every human-controlled player in the game has their own sense of a HUD that draws to their individual viewport. And if you're in a split-screen multiplayer, it will then draw the HUD to that specific piece of their interface. Sorry, that piece of the screen that they have. Again, player controller, this is the representation of the player in game, and this is where we're getting input, is through this class. And basically, the player controller is basically then pushing the controls of what it uses for input down to its pawn. So it issues commands to the pawn, for example, start crouching, jump, um, shooting is another command. Um, the player controller persists throughout the game session. So what do we mean is that you will always have your same player controller, but your pawn can be transient. So just go back to Unreal Tournament. You're killed. Um, your current pawn, you no longer possess your current pawn, and it goes flopping over, ragdolling. Couldn't remember earlier what the term is. It goes ragdoll on you, and then it stops, and then it dereses from the world. Whereas you now have moved on, you don't have a pawn, you move on to a spectator class, and then from the spectator you've now respawned in with a new pawn in game. And that's what we mean by the pawns can be transient. And there's two types of controller classes, player controller and AI. Again, players have player controllers and any AI entities. So again, bots specifically are an AI entity. Now, not every entity that has some sort of AI is going to use the AI controller. Let's take Goombas for example from Mario. They're not. They've got a scripted behavior. They're not AI, but they have. But they're scripted. You know, they do their one thing and it's off they do. Player state. So player state, game state is player state is the representation of your information, and this goes from your name, your score, your kills, your deaths. These are things that would be put into your player state. And this is basically this class is here for replication purposes. So this gets so where you have your player controller on your PC, there's a player state for you on your machine, but you have only then you have everyone else's player states. So that's the big thing here is that the player state is really for information that is for replication purposes. Game state contains the state of the game, which includes things as a list of connected players, the score, where pieces are in a chess game, list of missions you completed in an open world game, exists on the server and all clients so you can replicate information between system, from the server to the client. That's the purpose of this class right here. Again, I talked about game instances again. So, game mode, player mode are destroyed between level load assets, and data stored in those is removed. Anything that's in game instance class is going to persist between different levels. So players' health, ammo, overall score would be in the game instance. Half-Life 2, for example, you go from level to level. Players, your health and your ammo and other facts of you right now would be in that game instance class. And they're gonna what they want to show you. I need to go open Unreal. Is they're like, hey, do this, make multiple game modes, and honestly, you're not really making game modes as the way that they're talking about. But what they want to highlight there is something called the world panel, and you can for a level. Let's see, this would be. So what you can do per level through here's the world settings, and here you can override the game mode. Why is it doing override of the game mode in this level? That's interesting. And then there is you can do. Wow, they're doing a lot in this level. That's weird. That's weird. So there's the default pawn class. That's the only one they're actually using. But essentially, they're overriding the game mode and what is the default pawn in this level. Again, you wouldn't be doing this unless you were doing something very specific. Again, those Mass Effect 2 levels where they were using, I forget the name. It's not the Mako. It's another vehicle. Um, those levels probably had some because default load in default pawn of that vehicle instead. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's a lot you can do with again. There's a lot you can do with the level. So this has a kill Z set. That's cool. There's probably more I can probably throw in here. Yeah, I'm gonna close the world settings. All right. over here. And I'm just going to make a new box. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make a new cube. Probably do half the size of this. Quarter. There we go. So basically I only want a little platform to be on. And I'll make this 2 by 2. Then the next thing I'm going to add to the world is it's going to be a volume. And there are a whole sorts of different volumes. So there's audio volumes, level streaming volumes, nav mesh volumes, location volumes. But there is pain-causing volumes. There's lots of different volumes for different purposes. The one that we're going to use is the trigger volume. Bring it right here. And then ultimately what we want to do is add, we'll use a point light. Make this red. So the issue is that while this is somewhat showing it's red, the issue that we're dealing with is that the directional light is super powerful. There we go. So we reduce that. Now you can see the red glow from the light now. So this is going to be the basic setup that you want. You want a platform, you want the trigger, and you want the light here. We're going to work with the level blueprint this weekend. So we click here, open level blueprint. And I'm going to grab this and dock it here to make it easy to go back and forth. All right, first I'm going to grab we're going to start with the trigger volume. And in here, we're going to right click and then add an event for trigger volume, and it's going to be collision. And we're going to do begin overlap and end overlap. I'm just go back and I'm going to add event, collision, end overlap. Now there is another one is begin. So there's an event called begin play, and we're going to basically want this. Basically, when the level starts, basically we're going to turn off the light. And we'll use the same method. So we're going to use the same method of whether it is end overlap, begin play. You're going to use the same method of doing it. So, all right. So let's go back to the level. So what we're going to do is affect the light. So let's touch that, and what we will do is we will create a reference to the point light, and then we'll drag this out for our first node. And I'm going to do this. Set this by visibility. There we go. Set visibility. And it's going to give us a conversion from the actor entity point light to its light component. Then I can just bring it in like here, and then any visibility is that. Now I'm going to hold down Shift and I select these three again. And I'm going to go copy and I'm going to paste that. And I'll bring this down here. I'm going to turn off the new visibility, and this is going to be when we leave it and also when we begin play. When you are doing work in Blueprint, make sure you compile. Otherwise, you haven't changed anything. Go back to the third-person map, we'll press play, and you'll see that the light is turned off. If I go up over it, it's now turned on. going to go up here. I'm going to do something silly. I'm going to do play sound. Do play sound at location. And from the light component, I'm going to go get location. Get world location. And this return value basically is going to be a vector. So that's one of the things is that you'll see that the return value is vector. Vector is going to be green. This is a target. This is an object. These are booleans right here. And I need to give it a sound asset. And I'm going to yeah, I'll use fire. That's not stopping. Yeah, I'll just use this for the heck of it. I'll compile, go back to my third person map, and then I'll go in. And I've made the most boring game ever, but the whole point here, this is like your basic interactions. Player enters a trigger. What do you need to do? And we could kick off a whole bunch of other things from triggers as well. We can kick off cutscenes from triggers as well. So it's a very useful tool to know how to work. And again, right now we're working in the level blueprint. I'll be honest with you, the level blueprint is great for level specific things, but that's about it. Anything that you want to duplicate that probably should be an entity as a whole will end up being blueprint classes instead. So that's literally our next assignment next week is those blueprint classes. Um, I've gone pretty fast, pretty quickly with blueprint, with the level blueprint specifically. Is there any questions?
For the looking at the current drawing for the different classes.
We'll talk about classes next week.
Well, I'm talking about for the
This week we're using the level blueprint.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to make sure we get the terminology correct. Because when you say classes, something very different.
Right.
This week we're using the level blueprint. So it's specific. It's a blueprint specific to this level.
Right. So the diagrams. This is
yep.
We had to show the framework for classes and their relationships.
Oh, you're talking about the quiz.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the quiz. Basically, so I want you to diagram out the relationship of the core classes. But there is an image in documentation. If you find that, you can submit that as your answer.
Okay.
You have a ton of documents to read and documents that I've attached. You'll find it in one of those documents. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to stop the lecture here.